Back when it released in 2024, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl was one of the most demanding and poorly optimized games of the year. The game was built on Unreal Engine 5.1 and showcased many of the issues associated with that iteration of the engine. Perhaps the most impactful of these issues was its CPU performance. As we discussed in my video covering the game at launch, maintaining a consistent 60 FPS even on a CPU like the Ryzen 5700X3D was virtually impossible, and the only practical way to achieve a consistently high frame rate was to rely on frame generation. Now, following the game's launch, GSC released numerous technical updates aimed at reducing the CPU demand and improving overall performance. And by update 1.9, the game was running considerably better than it had at launch, but it was still very demanding on the hardware. Meanwhile, GSC was also working behind the scenes on a major update 2.0, which was set to release alongside the Cost of Hope DLC. Now, Update 2.0 has finally arrived. On the technical side, this update brings the game from Unreal Engine 5.1 to 5.5. And this engine upgrade does not just affect performance, which we'll get into in a moment, it also has a major impact on the visuals, as the game takes advantage of many of the improvements Unreal Engine has received since version 5.1. This includes a complete overhaul of the foliage, vegetation, and landscape, which now look much richer, denser, and more detailed compared to the thinner foliage coverage and simple look of the previous version. You might have also noticed that the game now looks considerably brighter and less contrasty than before. Part of the reason for this is the changes to Lumen and the game's lighting system, which now produces more pronounced bounce lighting and more stable global illumination and reflections. And judging by the reactions I've seen online, many seem to prefer the look of the previous version, myself included. But if this is a trade-off for all the technical improvements the game has received, then I am willing to accept it, especially if it comes with better performance. So let's take a look at the performance side, particularly CPU performance. Here in Zalicia, we can see on average a massive 43% from the launch version to 2.0, and around 25% compared to the previous update 1.9. If we move to a more CPU-demanding area like Rostock, the gap becomes significantly larger, with a 75% improvement over the launch version and 47% over update 1.9, which is quite remarkable. Now on the GPU side, the improvements are much less pronounced. Here we are seeing an average gain of around 11% between the launch version and update 2.0. And even less here in the Red Forest, which is one of the most GPU-demanding areas in the game. But to be fair, considering the amount of visual improvements and how much denser the zone looks now, getting this level of GPU performance is actually quite impressive. What's not impressive though is the performance stability and frame time consistency. After all, this is still an open world Unreal Engine 5 game. And frame pacing takes a noticeable hit when the game becomes more GPU limited, especially in denser areas. Reflex is another factor worth considering. As you can see here, enabling it disrupts the frame time consistency. Notice how much thicker and more uneven the frame time graph becomes with Reflex enabled. So I highly recommend experimenting with Reflex and checking whether disabling it improves the frame time stability. Since Update 2.0 improves CPU performance by a large margin, in theory, this should also improve the performance scalability of the game's graphics settings. So let's find out if that's actually the case, and let's start with texture quality. This one is straightforward and controls the quality of the game's textures and assets, which takes a noticeable hit at low and medium, and start looking acceptable at high and more so at epic. When it comes to VRAM usage on the 8GB 3060 Ti at 1440p with DLSS quality, using Epic Global Illumination, which is another setting that has a significant memory footprint, pushes VRAM usage to the full 8GB even with low texture quality. But dropping Global Illumination to high allows even Epic texture quality to fit within the 8GB VRAM without any issues, at least in this area. So if you have an 8GB GPU, avoid using Epic Global Illumination. As for texture quality, you can use Epic, but if you start noticing texture streaming issues or frequent stuttering, drop texture quality to high or medium. Next, we have hair. This one controls the quality and density of NPC's hair. Visually high and epic enables hair shadows, which can look quite noisy and distracting as you can see here. Performance-wise in this scene, there is a 4% cost from low to high and around 10% to epic. VRAM usage also increases, especially at epic. So for this one, I recommend saving both performance and VRAM by using medium. Moving on to object details, this one mainly adjusts the density of certain decorative meshes on buildings, as well as the mesh quality of some distant structures as you can see here. Performance-wise, I couldn't measure any meaningful difference between low and epic, so you can safely leave this one at epic. Let's move on to effects quality. This one controls the density of certain environmental effects, such as the rain, as you can see here, as well as the leaves and dust particles during stormy weather. Performance-wise, Epic is around 5% slower than low in this scene. But despite this relatively small performance difference, I recommend sticking with high or even medium just to stay on the safe side. Next, we have materials. This one adjusts the shading quality of some objects and surfaces, and its impact is more noticeable on foliage, which looks more natural starting from medium as you can see here. Performance-wise, there is no significant difference between the options, so you can leave this one as epic. Moving on to post-processing. During normal gameplay, the only visible change from this setting is the vignette effect, which becomes enabled starting from medium. Performance-wise, there is around a 3% cost when going from low to epic. So if you like the vignette effect, keep this one at medium or higher. Let's move on to light shafts. This one doesn't seem to be working, at least when it comes to these volumetric light shafts. But given that it's listed under post-processing, it's most likely controlling screen space light shafts instead. If that's the case, even when this setting does have a visible impact, it shouldn't have much effect on performance, since screen space light shafts are very cheap to render. Therefore, I recommend keeping it enabled. Next, we have Async Compute. This feature helps reduce GPU idle time by allowing certain workloads to run in parallel, potentially improving overall efficiency and performance. In practice, however, that benefit mainly shows up when the game is GPU limited, as you can see here, where enabling Async Compute improves performance by around 9%. When the game is CPU limited, this feature actually ends up hurting performance. So whether it should be enabled or not depends entirely on your system. That's why I recommend experimenting with it and seeing which option works best for you. Moving on to shading quality, this one mainly controls the quality of the game's ambient occlusion. At low, AO is disabled, while going to medium enables it, and going further increases its intensity. Performance-wise, there is around a 5% cost when moving from low to the higher options. So for this one, I recommend avoiding low at all costs and keeping it at medium or higher. Let's move on to global illumination. This one controls the quality and accuracy of lumens in direct lighting. Unlike what we see in most other UE5 games, low does not completely disable lumen here. Instead, lowering this setting mainly reduces the amount of bounce lighting and leads to more noise and boiling, as you can see in this example, where the higher options produce much cleaner results. When it comes to performance, there is only a meaningful impact when using Epic, which results in an 8% cost here. But if we return to the previous scene, we can see a much larger impact when using Epic. And as we saw earlier, global illumination also increases VRAM usage significantly. So for this one, I recommend high. Next, we have reflections. This one controls the quality of lumen reflections, and increasing it improves their accuracy and extends their coverage to more surfaces, as you can see here. Performance-wise, similar to global illumination, there is only a noticeable impact when using Epic, which results in around a 3% cost here. But this cost can get slightly higher on other scenes like this one. So for reflections, either use high if you want to save some performance and VRAM, or go all the way to Epic. Next, we have shadows. As usual, this setting controls the resolution and overall quality of the game's shadows. Low and medium show significantly more flickering compared to high and epic. This setting also affects shadows draw distance, which increases significantly from low to medium, then only slightly when moving up to high and epic. Additionally, as is common in UE5 games, the shadow setting also impacts volumetric effects, like here where low disables these volumetric light shafts while epic increases their resolution significantly. Performance-wise in this scene, there is around a 3% cost when going from low to high and roughly 13% when moving up to epic. However, the performance cost can increase considerably in areas with volumetric effects, especially at Epic, which results in a 24% hit in this scene. So for shadows, I recommend high. Moving on to clouds, this one controls the resolution of the game's volumetric clouds. As you can see here, the visual difference between the options is quite small and mainly noticeable when zooming in. Where the setting has a more noticeable impact is during stormy or overcast weather. Here, Epic produces a darker sky and overall darker weather compared to the lower options. Performance-wise, this scene shows roughly a 4% cost when going from low to high and 8% when moving up to Epic. And this cost can vary depending on the weather conditions. So to save some performance, I recommend medium. But if you prefer the darker look during emissions and cloudy weather, go with Epic. Let's move on to fog. This one controls the resolution of volumetric effects, including volumetric lighting, fog, and light shafts, as you can see here. When it comes to performance, there is a meaningful impact only when using Epic, which results in around a 7% cost here. So for this one, I recommend high. Next, we have sky. This one controls the quality of sky rendering, but its visual impact is fairly subtle and mainly becomes noticeable under certain weather conditions. Like here, where moving from low to the higher options produces more detailed and better defined cloud coverage. And on the performance side, this setting has no measurable impact, so you can leave it at Epic. Moving on to foliage quality, this one controls the density and draw distance of foliage. Thanks to the upgrade the game received in this regard with Update 2.0, even low retains a fairly dense layer of vegetation compared to what we usually see in other games. Also, there seems to be a bug related to this setting, as increasingly to remove trees far away from the camera. As for performance, in this scene there is around a 6% cost when going from low to high, and about 10% when moving to Epic. So for this one, I recommend medium or high. Let's move on to environment draw distance. This setting is supposed to control the draw distance of non-nanite meshes, but in my testing, switching between low and Epic did not show any visible difference. The same applies to performance with no noticeable difference between the options, so you can leave this one at Epic. Finally, we have field of view. Stalker 2 is one of those games where increasing the field of view can actually improve performance, as you can see here. So don't worry about performance if you prefer a wider field of view. So given everything we've discussed so far, these are my recommended settings for Stalker 2 Update 2.0. Now let's compare the performance of the optimized settings against the Epic preset at 1440p using DLSS quality. And I am using low texture quality to minimize VRAM usage as much as possible on the Epic preset side. Here we can see around a 44% performance gain when going from the Epic preset to the optimized settings. If we move to raw stock, we can see a smaller gain of around 27%, which is expected given that this area is more CPU demanding. So overall, despite the usual UE5 issues, GSC deserves a lot of credit for what they achieved with this update. Upgrading the engine from 5.1 to 5.5 for a game of this scale is not an easy task, and I am glad to see that the effort paid off, especially when it comes to CPU performance. Before ending the video, I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon. If you are able and would like to directly support my work, consider becoming a patron to get early access to my optimized settings, as well as downloads of the highest possible quality of my latest videos, including this one. And a big thank you to all my supporters, and thank you as well for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and if not, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.